Hello and welcome to a special edition of the World Football Show here on Sports Tonight Live. I'm your host, Mina Rzouki, and I'm joined by none other than Andy Brassell and Raphael Honigstein for today's show. We're going to be looking back over all the greatest moments of the season so far, and that includes all the big names in Europe and much, much more. Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Very well.
Well, you?
I'm very well, thank you. Let's start off with Spain, because in my opinion, it's probably the best league in the world. A lot of people will argue with me with that. But let's see.
I won't, he can.
Come on,
Best mini league in the world.
Best mini league. Now Diego Simeone did come out and say that it's boring league because, of course, Barcelona is just running away with it, as they always do, although they didn't last year, I guess. What do you think? Is this isn't, everyone keeps talking about this Barcelona not being the greatest ever, but Tito Villanova has, well, as in Pep Guardiola's Barcelona was a little bit better, and yet Tito Villanova has won everything and drawn only one game. So surely this is a better side than we've seen.
Well, it's the best start of anyone ever to a La Liga campaign. And I don't think, the thing is, Villanova, it's something that's happened in the all through the history of football, that if someone takes over a successful team, the new manager is never really given credit for taking it on and maybe making them even better. You look at like Michel's Ajax going over to Stefan Kovacs, where everyone said, oh, even an idiot could manage that team and all that sort of stuff, even though he went on to win 2 European Cups. And it's a similar thing with Villanova, but he has changed the system. They care far less about defence.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not so much
more
about,
direct as well than they usually are.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I'd be very interested to see how Zlatan would get on in this team if he'd have been in Villanova's Barcelona.
Oh, Zlatan is, of course, probably now one of your favourite players.
What do you mean now?
But do you, okay, now that we've seen this, do you think this is just a poor Madrid and then that Barcelona are just so far and away better? Because when you see them play, they seem on par.
I don't think they're on par this half. I mean, this half of 2012, they haven't been on par. Barcelona have been much more consistent. Real Madrid look tired, they look jaded.
No, but as a team.
Sort of performances, I think. I mean, you know, Barcelona look imperious. I don't see any weakness. They press a little bit less. They give a bit more ground and opportunities to the opposition, but they do that knowingly that we can still outscore them if need be. And you know, they're a team, I think, at the very peak of their powers. Of course, the proof of the pudding will come in the first half of 2013, because he needs really then, or his side, you know, hopefully he will be there, but certainly this Barcelona team need to go on and do something in the Champions League again, I think, to be considered Pep's equals. But I think, you know, player by player, I don't see a big difference. If anything, I think they're stronger this year.
What about Atletico Madrid? Are they the surprise package of La Liga so far this season?
I don't think there's a surprise package. I think they are fulfilling their potential. I mean, maybe there is a surprise as far as Atletico is concerned, because they never do. But you know,
they still couldn't defeat Real Madrid, huh?
What are the obvious teams that you know, point a finger at and said, you know, they should be ahead of them? I don't really see any. Valencia, you know, have really fallen away. They're very poor, I think, for me. And then you already struggle, you know, to pick any genuine big names. There are hardly left, you know, with Deportivo going out of business even. So I think Atletico should be up there. I think it's a surprise that it's taken them all these years to finally get to that point. And you wonder if they can, you know, keep that up. And then they've been in the Champions League before, of course, and then it seemed a bit like a false dawn 3 or 4 years ago. It'd be nice to see them really establish themselves among the big four, and you know, and they will never challenge the duopoly of Madrid, of Real and Barcelona, but at least they can keep growing as a club if they qualify regularly.
Well, I'm flying the flag for Betis because I'd love to see them qualify for the Champions League. But with us now, we do have Joseph Sexton with us. Hello, Joseph, how are you?
I'm very good.
So tell us about what has been the surprise package for you so far this season. I mean, did anyone think that Malaga would do so well? Do you agree with the fact that Raf thinks that Atletico Madrid are simply living up to their potential? And what's happening with Madrid? Real Madrid, rather.
I suppose to start with the question on Atletico, it couldn't really have been set up better for them this season, could it? I mean, as you've alluded to, Valencia have fallen away spectacularly. And you know, you have this situation where Atletico, they might have one or two less star names than they've had in recent years, but what they have is a team, what they have is spirit. And with Simeone, they've got fantastic organisation. So, you take that all into account and you look at the relative strengths of some of the other sides in there, and I think it's fantastic to see them finally getting their act together. But of course, we're only halfway through the season, so it's not out of the question that things could go wrong between now and the season's end. I think as far as Malaga goes, I'm thinking back to some of the predictions I read, and even a couple of the predictions I wrote myself at the start of the season, where they were particularly light going into the opening weekend, and they strengthened a little bit just before the transfer window ended. But no, they've been absolutely fantastic. I think taking into consideration qualifiers, they didn't concede in the Champions League until their 6th game, and they've kept right up there in the league. With the squad situation, with the lack of players, something that's going to need to be addressed, I think, if we're not going to see them drop away towards the latter half. It's been a sterling performance for them to date.
What about, let's talk a little bit about Real Madrid, because of course I think everyone expected, after a record-breaking season last year, that they would really manage to go on and just do some more. If anything, they've added the likes of Modric to the squad, so we thought this was going to be an excellent side. Do you think it's just they've had enough with Jose Mourinho? Andy, what do you think is what is the malaise that's going on in Real Madrid at the moment?
Well, I think they got closer to what Barcelona had last season, not in terms of the way they played, of course, but in terms of sort of tightness of squad, where everyone felt involved. And I think that's why it's always difficult building on triumph. Now, you talked about Modric coming in, and he had a very defined role at Tottenham, whereas firstly, he's not sure of his place at the Bernabeu, and secondly, he's been played in 3 different positions since he's arrived. He's played in that sort of deep-lying playmaker role. He's played as a 10, which he didn't play for a long time at Tottenham, and then he's played on the left, which Spurs wouldn't have done until sort of pre-Gareth Bale. So I think there's a little bit of confusion where there wasn't before. And also, you always think about a team that's had such a titanic effort to beat Barcelona as they did in the league last season, which is an incredible achievement. It is an incredible achievement. You think they've got to find the motivation again, particularly after the Euros, and that's what they found a little bit difficult at the start of the season. And of course, in a competition when it's so tight between those two, every time you drop a point so much, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
I think it's also possibly the case that Mourinho's shtick is just wearing a bit thin.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The players stop listening.
Yeah, I just think that
he's an impact manager. I mean, you go throughout his CV, and he comes in and he does a job. Usually by the 2nd year, he's won something. The 3rd year, things usually turn, and there has never been a 4th year. So, I don't think that's a coincidence. That's the way he works, and we've seen it from other coaches who work in different manners. If the intensity is so strong, every team talk is intense, every training session is intense, it just wears off. Players can only take so much, and especially if they've done the big thing, which was to win the title, to break Barcelona's dominance domestically. I can still see them going far into the Champions League, because that's almost irrespective of what happens between the coach and the manager, as we've seen many times, especially with Chelsea in recent years. It almost doesn't matter. But domestically, I don't think you can keep it up if you just think, here's another team talk. We're playing Levante, we're playing Getafe. It's really annoying. I don't want to listen anymore.
Joseph, do you think it's a case of it just being about Mourinho, or do you think that the players are just a little bit complacent? You see now at the back, especially with the likes of, Pepe and Sergio Ramos sort of falling asleep at times. They concede consistently from set pieces. Are the players just not caring anymore when it comes to the league?
I think you have to point the finger to an extent at the players for the set piece defending. This has been going on, I think, really since possibly last January or December of last year, and it's gotten progressively worse. Whereas to the extent that in recent weeks it's just been Keystone Cop stuff. But off the park, there's clearly issues with Mourinho's position just now. There's there's a certain degree of tension amongst the squad, amongst certain cliques within the squad, and of course towards Mourinho himself. And then you have that word you brought that I think Rafa just brought up, intensity. I think that's the key. The level of intensity which they had to reach last season, which they reached, it was staggering. Racking up the goals, the relentlessness, breaking all the records, and I I think it's very, very hard to replicate and to match that level. And I think also, to be fair, I think they've been kind of caught cold by the way Barcelona have just slipped into gear under Tito Villanova. They've been better, I think, than anyone could have expected. Real have been a lot worse than anyone could have expected, and it already looks like it's almost certain that the league is a write-off at this stage.
Joseph, another team who's perhaps stopped listening to their coach a little bit is Athletic Bilbao. Now, they've had a really divided 2012. Of course, we all saw them in tears after the Europa League final, which they lost to Atletico. Where's it gone wrong for Bielsa, in your view?
I think there's a lot of factors. I think many of us would have heard in the last few months the post-cup final dressing room chat, which was leaked to the media, and many other things which have been leaked out to the media, the clips on the training ground. But you see the way he's speaking to the players. I don't think it's overly harsh, but you can perhaps see, again, an element of conflict. He really felt that they'd let themselves down in the final, and I think that they felt they ran themselves to death in the closing stages of last season. I think there's a bit of resentment that's built up there. You obviously have the situation which is helping nobody, and it's just getting boring as hell with Llorente. I mean, it's just bizarre that the club seem to want to hold the player to his contract when Bielsa has no intention of playing him. So I think you've got many factors there, and I think you're seeing a lot of the players, although they do seem to be kind of getting back into a bit of a rhythm. They're starting to pick up in terms of the results. They're starting to rise up the table. But I think, you see that they don't have that same belief, that same desire, that, they don't seem to want to play for Bielsa as much as they did last season. And I think that's a great shame. And, it's a pity because we expected they could go on to great things this side.
Yeah, we thought so too. But thank you so much for joining us, Joseph. It was a pleasure having you on. Right, gentlemen, what has been the biggest disappointment for you in La Liga? Teams, players, anyone that has really sort of not performed?
For me, Sevilla, I think, because, you remember how exciting they were under...
Do you think that has anything to do with the president?
To a certain extent. I mean, obviously he's had his own legal difficulties, which I don't think have helped. Maybe he hasn't been able to concentrate on the club as closely as he would have been. But I think the expectations were really high from that Juan de Ramos era, and it's something that Manolo suffered from when he came in after him. But there's no stability. There's the fact that Monchi, their sporting director, who signed an extension to his contract earlier this year, has not been as prolific with finding players as he had been before. You look at some of the players he got in and then sold for great fees, Dani Alves being the most obvious one. The fact that they could bring in players from the Cantera and sell them for a lot of money, Sergio Ramos being the most obvious one. And, they've lost the style, they've lost the verve that they had now. They're really struggling to find an identity. And I think that's a great shame, because they were such a boon to La Liga when they were doing really well in the Champions League and doing very well as possibly even a creditable title challenger.
I also think that, if we look at Espanyol as well, I was very disappointed with what's going on there, and I think that has a lot to do with the way the management have handled the situation, and now Ramon Planes is out. So, I mean, to kick out Pochettino, honestly, that's just the biggest shame. What about you? Greatest disappointment?
Well, I think greatest disappointment as a neutral is the fact that the two biggest teams in the world didn't make it to the Champions League final. I think they will always look back at this. Well, not always. It depends what happens next year. But I think they would have to look back at this and say, how in the hell did we not get there? I think you can, to a certain extent, excuse Real Madrid because they came very close, got knocked out on penalties. That can happen. But they were in the lead. They were coasting at one point. They conceded a really silly goal in Munich to change the tie. And Barcelona, I mean, how did they not beat Chelsea? It's just beggars belief. So I think, it's a big disappointment as far as the league is concerned, because if you are not fulfilling your potential, if you don't do what you should be doing, I think you have to look at that and not be happy about that.
Okay, briefly, let's just end this part on a nice, rounded thing. Greatest achievements, the best player would be Lionel Messi, I guess. Best team is Barcelona.
Well, they didn't win the league in 2012.
Yeah, but we're talking about this season so far.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. Then, you know, he's
Ronaldo never gets a shout, huh?
History again. Well, I think you could say Ronaldo's achievement is perhaps even better this season because he's for the season. I think he's 1 or 2 goals behind Messi, despite the fact. I love this conversation. Despite the fact that Real Madrid have been way below par, and if you can say the intensity of the players in general has dropped, if Mourinho's saying I don't recognise my team, and I think about 5 games into the season when they lost at Sevilla, he said I don't have a team. You could never level that accusation at Ronaldo.
It's definitely messy for Raphael Honigstein. But do join us after the break where we'll be heading over to Germany. See you then. Hello and welcome back to the World Football Show and our special edition of this particular show. Now we move on to Germany, and of course I think everyone keeps talking about how wonderful Dortmund were in the Champions League, how wonderfully consistent Bayern have been in the actual domestic league. And then there's Bayer Leverkusen and all the small teams that have been doing particularly well. Is there anything that you can flag up as being truly exceptional or not expected in the Bundesliga this year?
Well, I think you have to, if you look at the calendar year, Freiburg have been absolutely out of this world. You know, they finished 2011 bottom of the table, I think with 13 points, and they've since notched up, I think, 53 points in the calendar year to finish 5th going into the winter break. And if you look at their budget, if you look at the players, you know, the one player that people will know, Papis Demba Cisse, of course, was sold 12 months ago. So you can't even say, you know, of course, you know, I know this guy. He's no longer there. But they've got a team, and I think in Christian Streich, the manager, they almost have like a sort of Germanic version of Marcelo Bielsa. He's a bit nuts, very, very intense, talks about respect, collective responsibility all the time, insane pressing game. You know, he kind of fits the bill, and Freiburg as a team are much bigger than the sum of their parts. And if you think about you know, really genuine heavyweights like Stuttgart, Hamburg, Wolfsburg, all far behind them, Bremen, it really shows just how well they've done this year.
Are they like a little mini Dortmund, would you say?
In a way, yes. I mean, they were trendsetters in the 90s for playing this kind of game. It's
hard to maintain this kind of
very
game.
much based on what Lewandowski was doing at Kiev at the time. So they used to call it concept football because they would actually drill, unlike other teams, drill specific attacking moves, which was unheard of in the 90s. And they've always sort of stayed true to that philosophy. But as you said, I mean, it's very difficult, especially if the better players get picked off every year. But now it's just incredible. Can they qualify for the Europa League? I still think that the bigger sides will come back quite strong. But just to be that far up, followed by Mainz, is a similar story really, also similar tactics. They probably mini Dortmund in the way they play.
Yeah, they're
is tremendous. And it also adds a bit of excitement because, you know, with Bayern being so far ahead, I think the Champions race itself will be not that interesting this year, but what happens beneath them will be, because sort of from second, third down all the way to like 13th, 14th, everyone can still get into the Europe and the Champions League, so it's going to be really interesting.
Well, we've seen about how much the collective can actually affect, you know, the league and sort of even the Champions League. We've seen kind of a different style of football winning nowadays, not so much ball control, but maybe, you know, having 11 soldiers on the pitch fighting for one cause. And perhaps that is why Dortmund are now doing so well. What does that say for the likes of Bayern Munich, who are more based on individual talent and rare exception? I mean, do you think that having failed to actually win the Champions League in their backyard, that they've come out this year thinking we're so determined to do something different?
Well, in terms of the Championship, yes, and they have. It's hard to tell from the Champions League group because, of course, they lost that game in Bate, which was a real shock. Slightly misleading result, but still, it makes you wonder how they're going to do when they get to the last 4 of the competition. It's getting over the line. It's like the German national team, really. It's getting over the line that's the important thing, and you know that's what's going to count. But you know, every year that Bayern don't win something, they have to make some sort of grand gesture. Like if you look at Dortmund this season, for example, they're way off the title pace. But people aren't really talking about it that much outside of Germany because, you know, they're doing really well in the Champions League. And if Dortmund don't win the title for a season, It's no big thing. Whereas every year that Bayern don't win it, it's a massive problem, and it always leads to this soul searching within the club.
What is interesting though is that Bayern have taken a leaf out of Dortmund's book and have realised that just picking the best 11 players is no longer enough, and they have started pressing a lot more. They don't press as high as Dortmund.
Not such a lethargic approach, basically.
Well, I'm not sure they were ever lethargic, but they added some elements of Dortmund's game to theirs, and that's made them a winning combination in the league, because it's not just the tactics, but the tactics are also an expression of the team's attitude. I mean, Dortmund play with a greed, with a hunger, with a willingness to fight, to win every single game. Bayern historically haven't had that, because they used to go into games 9 out of 10 knowing that we're going to win, and they can be a bit lackadaisical. But because what Dortmund has done to them, and the way that Dortmund have played and reaped all the plaudits and everything, they've taken that bit of extra hunger and a bit of extra intensity. And it's a bit like last year's Real Madrid. I mean, you take great players, but you give them a kind of almost a blue-collar mentality, and that's a very, very strong combination.
Well, I also want to talk about the fact that their one loss did come, which I always find surprising with Bayern, is that sometimes, when they do lose, they'll lose against the ones that are right next to them. Sometimes it's a thing of when they match the big teams, what happens to them when they are facing the big size? And they lost to Bayer Leverkusen. And of course that was a huge, both emotional and everything, a huge win for Leverkusen.
For Bayern,
what happens to Bayern Munich sometimes? I mean, they've struggled to beat Dortmund, and then now that Leverkusen is sort of coming up the table, they're also struggling with that too. Do you think that has any effect on them?
Well, Leverkusen, if you look at the game, it was one of those games. Bayern dominate, they don't score. Leverkusen defend very deep. They're a counter-attacking team. They take a chance after some horrendous mistakes at the back, yet again, from Jerome Boateng.
Seems to be always the man at fault.
Yeah, it usually is. And, they can't quite turn it around. Not sure it tells us that much about Bayern. It tells us a lot about Leverkusen, because it suggests that, they're not there by accident. It hasn't been a fluke that they're in second spot. I don't think still that they're going to keep that. I think Dortmund will still overtake them. But getting into the Champions League, keeping all their players, because they could have easily said, we're only Leverkusen, so you offer us 25 million for Lars Bender, go take him. You offer us a similar kind of money for Schürrle from Chelsea, we'll take him. But they said no. We want to leave the money on the pitch and go for it. And it pays dividend. Also, a very interesting experiment, of course, with the management, because you've got Sasha Lewandowski, who's the young tactical guy, but very little credentials. And you've got Hyypiä, who's the great big guy, but hasn't got really any coaching know-how. And it looks a little bit like an artificial solution to put them both together, but somehow it works, because one guy listens and kind of understands the dressing room, and the other guy knows his tactical stuff. It's interesting.
Well, it's a huge step forward to have two coaches there. Perhaps maybe one day they'll even have a woman. But I do want to talk about how amazing the German teams have been in the Champions League. With everything that's happened with the English sides, everyone's going, is the Premier League really as strong as we think it is? Is the Bundesliga probably one of the strongest now, considering what they've all ended, top of their groups in the Champions League? They are the toughest sides. Should they be more respected?
Well, I think it shows what a complex discussion it is when people say, what is the best league? Because, people always do down La Liga because two teams are way above everyone else. But these are the best two teams in world club football. They're two incredible teams. And, maybe that sort of thing is happening with the Bundesliga eventually, because you've got a genuine rival for Bayern at last, And Dortmund look as if they could do it consistently. They're continuing to build, that you look at, maybe they've slightly improved this season, getting in Marco Reus, globally, of course, because they've fallen off a little bit in the league. There's genuine ambition to grow. They've got that sort of fan base where they can do that as well. So maybe this is the sort of rivalry that will last. And of course, they're getting matched up again in the quarterfinals of the German Cup.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I just want to name, I want you guys to name for me the player that you've felt has either been a surprise package or has finally fulfilled his potential to be sort of the best player so far this season. Who would you say that would be?
Well, he's neither surprised nor has he not fulfilled his potential before, but I think Marco Reus over the calendar year has been the most outstanding player because, you look at Bayern even this year and you think, who's really been their number one player? It's hard to say because everyone's kind of playing really well. None of them is really truly outstanding.
Yeah.
But Reus certainly was truly outstanding for Gladbach, and he's carried on where he's left off.
Dortmund.
And if anything has become, with Gladbach, and if anything he's become stronger now at Dortmund in the second half.
And who would you say?
Well, seeing as I've had Royce stolen from me, I'm going to go for the... well, everyone's going to go for him. I think I'd go for... Talking about what Rafa was saying about Bayern being a collective, I think that Frank Ribery is really bought into that. He works extremely hard defensively as well as in an attacking sense. And you think how reliant they were on Arjen Robben when they got to the 2010 Champions League final? That's not the case anymore.
Well, I'm still sticking with Royce, even if he did take it from me. But do join us after the break, where we'll head over to France to discuss Ibra and more. See you in a bit. Hello and welcome back to the World of Football show here on Sports Tonight Live. Now we move over to France, and of course all the highlights and everything that's happened. It's the only team anyone ever talks about when it comes to France is PSG. Is that because they are the only club that have money, and yet they're not winning? They're not even. We're not even sure that they have the potential to.
Minted but potless. they definitely have the potential to. I don't think you can argue with that. You just have to look at the players. And
considering how they're doing in the league now, you're not even sure that they can do it.
They're top. They are top, having beaten
Finally.
Lyon, in the penultimate game of 2012. But it's been a very mixed time for Ancelotti. And I think what's interesting is bought neither the trophies nor the style, because of course you think they started 2012, not only with Ancelotti, not only with a couple of new players. Thiago Motta came across and joined his team, and of course all the players they've bought since. But they were 3 points clear at the top of the league in front of Montpellier, who've shown just how modest they are in the start of 2010, 2013, and shown really just it was a perfect storm for them to win. And I think they still can't believe it. That's part of the reason they've started this season so poorly, apart from its a natural dropping of level as well. So PSG have got a lot of questions to answer going into 2013.
Yeah, tons. And hopefully we can get some answers from Jonathan Johnson from France, French Football Weekly rather. Hello Jonathan, how are you?
I'm not bad, thank you. How are yourselves?
I'm very well, thank you. So do you think with PSG it's a question of it's a project, it's a lot of individual talent, it's let's try to make this a team, and that's obviously going to be a long process, but really can we say that when they've spent so much money?
I mean, I think you have to bear in mind that it's a long-term project. They're trying to put in a lot of moving pieces into this team constantly, and they're not, this team haven't actually played together for that long. I mean, there have been signs of progress this season when they've looked very good, but then that progress has been quickly undone at times. And I think Ancelotti's finally discovering the 11 that he wants to be putting out on the team, week in, week out, for the first time all season, really. And I think that's why they've started to pick up recently. They've got the 3 wins on the bounce. 2 of those were 4-0 victories. And I think that going into 2013, I think we'll see a more settled PSG. And I think particularly once the Javier Pastore saga gets resolved, I think you'll start seeing things come together on the pitch a lot more.
Jonathan, you talked then about Pastore, and that's something that I wanted to ask you. There's been a lot of speculation in France over successors to Ancelotti already because, he's not really produced that stylish sort of game, perhaps outside the Champions League, you can say. There's got to be a lot of question over Leonardo's position, hasn't there? Because look at the players he's bought, and some, like Pastore, are quite unsuitable for France.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, and I think I actually find it staggering that people are questioning Ancelotti's position as manager and not actually mentioning Leonardo's position as sporting director at all, because if anyone's head should be on the chopping block because of the players that have been brought in, you'd have to say it was Leonardo for a start. A lot of the players that Ancelotti inherited have been Leonardo purchases, and you're right, Pastore is a player that's not really turned out to be suited to France. I don't think he's helped himself, but Ancelotti has shown a willingness to, to keep Pastore involved and to try and persevere with him. But it doesn't seem that Pastore in this case has the will to continue and really put the effort in. And I think with players coming in January like Lucas Moura, you're going to see Nene leaving as well in January. There's going to be more change again, and I think Ancelotti, it's impossible for him to really get settled with the players that he wants to be putting out week in, week out, and that, you know, seeing the players that Leonardo wants to bring in also being incorporated into the team. I think for the first time since Ancelotti arrived at PSG, we're actually seeing that there's actually a pretty big gulf between what Leonardo's thinking or his visions of the future at PSG and then Ancelotti's.
Jonathan, how do you see Lyon doing for the rest of the season? I mean, we know about PSG and their problems, but you know, Lyon over the course of the calendar year haven't exactly covered themselves in glory. Are they now getting their act together, or is there the same weakness, well, not the same, but the same level of problems that we've seen from PSG, just with different numbers?
No, I mean, I think Lyon's problem is that they have become a selling club in recent years. I mean, Jean-Michel Aulas, he's done fantastic things for Lyon since he's been in charge there. But recently, the club they've not fallen on hard times, but they've started, you know, tightening the belt a bit, trying to restructure the club's wage bill, and that has included Aulas selling a lot of first-team players, but players that he thinks are past their prime. It hasn't really mattered what Rémi Garde has thought of those players or how much he's used them in the first team up until now, because interestingly enough, Bafétimbi Gomis is the second highest goal scorer in Liga. He's now being coveted by teams such as Chelsea and Liverpool. Press are mooting a €10 million price tag in January. If Gomis leaves Lyon, Lyon will not challenge for the title. There aren't enough star names in that Lyon team to drag what is essentially a youth academy to a Ligue 1 title. It's impossible. They're using so many of the young players that they've bought wisely or brought through the academy themselves, that they're now relying on some of the more seasoned veterans like Lisandro Lopez, Gomis, Milan Bisevac, who arrived in a cut price deal from PSG in the summer, and then Yoann Gourcuff. And the problem for Aulas is that he's been hurt in the past by some really poor transfer deals, Gourcuff being the main culprit.
Okay, Jonathan, I just want to ask you briefly who you think will win the league this year.
I think in the end, PSG's quality will tell. There's too much individual quality in that team for them to be unable to win the title. I think that you will eventually see Ancelotti get it right on the pitch. I think it's maybe going to cost him relationships with a couple of players. I mean, we've seen, you know, he's had no qualms at all about showing Nene the door already. And Nene was PSG's outstanding player in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And I think the same will probably happen with Pastore. And I think once Ancelotti actually gets a firm grip on who he wants to be playing in his team week in, week out, and doesn't sort of have to keep feeling like he's playing players because Leonardo has brought them in, and he sort of feels that he has to use those players that have come in amidst much fanfare, have cost a lot of money, and earn a lot of money each week through their wages.
Okay.
Some stars deliver. Ibrahimovic and Thiago Silva at the moment, they're delivering on a week by week basis. Other players such as Pastore aren't, and Ancelotti wants to rid the players that don't seem committed enough to the project.
Jonathan, I'm not so sure I do agree with you, but I'm going to have to let you go for this part. But thank you so much for joining us on there. I think everyone is pretty much convinced that it's going to be PSG. But I do want to ask you a quick question, because I think there is a spectacular fall from grace for a team like Lille, especially what's happened with Hazard leaving them, and what has happened over the Champions League. They were just woeful.
Yeah.
What happened there? Is there any hope that they will get back into their groove?
Well, I think there is eventually. I'm not sure that they'll make up the ground this season. I think a Europa League qualification is far more realistic than a Champions League qualification. But I think what's happened with Hazard leaving is very much the Van Persie effect at Arsenal. It shows that he was hiding a multitude of sins with his individual brilliance, and that was always the case. They always had problems at the back. The midfield wasn't as strong as it was, and there were a real lack of characters, in the team, and I think that was a definite problem. And I think you've seen that through the fact that other senior players have been marginalised. Like Landreau's had his contract cancelled. Debusshy's had his nose put out of joint. He's very long serving by having that move to Newcastle nullified and put out of the window when, you know, he's given the club really great service.
Sure.
So I think that's a problem for them. The difference with Arsenal, of course, is they managed to bring in a few players who will settle eventually. Lille haven't done that, and I think, you know, they've concentrated so much on the infrastructure of the club. They need to do some work on the team.
Well, that's what we have for France, but do join us after the break where we'll be talking about our best teams of the year and, of course, Italy. See you after the break. Hello and welcome back to the World Football Show here on Sports Tonight Live. Now we move on to Serie A, Italy and Calcio and the rest of it. And of course, has there been a better team this year than Juventus?
Well, they've done very well. I don't think you can argue with that. It's been a fantastic run.
I wanted more excitement when you were saying that. I mean, I want you to go out and say, like, wow, they're glorious.
You're providing all the excitement for the three of us. I mean, come on. Obviously, the arrival of Bentner has been the main thing.
I think so too.
That we all want to talk about. But incredible achievement last season. I think I would have liked to see them tested a bit more in the first half of 2012, 2013.
What, more than the fact that they won the Champions League group as well as being
No.
clear?
I would have liked to see them tested more domestically because Napoli have been a little bit scatty. Of course,
Right.
they've had the
they've
disciplinary
suffered 2
stuff as well recently, which has been a problem. Inter are in some sort of level of reconstruction. So I think they've managed to balance the domestic and the Champions League pretty well. But if they'd have been pushed a little bit more at home, I would have liked to see how they'd react.
2 defeats for them, though.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sorry, but I have to agree with Andy a little bit. It's almost like they're winning the league by default this year because there isn't any credible contender out there. I think when we had this discussion at the beginning of the season that Inter might actually get there, but it's still, as Andy said, a bit of too much of a transitional phase for them. Milan, you know, very unconvincing, and then the others, under which head I would class sort of the Napolis, the Udineses, they're not quite there yet either. So
it's just an easy thing for you.
It's not easy.
So easy.
It's not easy, but I think that they haven't got what Bayern and Dortmund have, for example, or what Real Madrid and Barcelona have. They are the one clearly outstanding team in the league with no one else anywhere near it. So you'd expect them to win it.
Oh, okay. Well, we've got Tancredi Palmieri with us from Italy. And tell me, Tancredi, I really do hope that you don't agree with that.
Mina, it's hard not to agree with that. Buongiorno. The thing is that if you want to know, the day that Juventus signed Antonio Conte, so even before that they signed, some 10 days before they signed Andrea Pirlo, I was beside some Juventus fans, and they were all desperate for the season that Juventus was having. And I remember that day I told them, look, the future is of yours. Inter and Milan are going to be in transitional years. At least in the next 2 years will be yours because they will need time and money to reconstruct. So I agree even more than that with that.
Okay, well, I still think the fact that they won one of the most difficult Champions League groups says something about how consistent and how great they have been in the year. And they haven't had their coach on the sidelines for much of 2012.
Yeah, but nothing to take away from the value of Juventus. It's not that for the fault of Juventus that the others in this moment are so weak. Juventus is one of the most serious competitors for the Champions League. The problem is that the others are way behind.
Right. Okay. And also now tell me, who do you think has been really disappointing this season? I mean, for me, I constantly feel like Napoli is always there, but never good enough to really be on that highest quality, that level. That's always going to be what I'm most disappointed about. Walter Mazzarri, perhaps maybe too emotional of a coach to push them that much further. What has been your greatest disappointment in Italy?
Well, I have to, if we talk about not 2012 as the year, but just as this season, 2012-2013, I agree with you. I would say I would put together Napoli and Roma. I know that a lot of others would say, hey, come on, Milan is 7th of the league. How disappointment is that? But everybody was expecting, even if not in this way, but everybody was expecting at least the first 6 months of, as we said, transition from Milan after selling Ibrahimovic and Thiago Silva. Problem with Napoli, okay, they are always there close to the top, if not at the top. The disappointment from them comes that whenever they had a big clash, not only in this season, even in the previous 2 seasons, they always have been a huge disappointment. Nobody is expecting from them to win the league, but at least coming so close to be a much more serious challenger when it's come to be 1 against 1, when they have the face-off, and always the lack of personality in their games.
Yes, I agree with you. What about you guys? Who do you think has been your standout player?
I suppose
probably to be different when
Pirlo's the obvious choice, I suppose, because he's done it for both Juventus and Italy, and he's continued it into 2012-13. Now, we were talking before about, when we were talking about Spain, how difficult it is to maintain that intensity after a real high. I think Real Madrid are a really good example of that. But whereas if you look at what Pirlo did for Juventus last season, what he continued through the Euros and what he's continued to offer with that readaptation to the Champions League, which is obviously so important for them and something they've waited for so long, I think that's really incredible.
Right, would you say, Tancredi, that perhaps El Shaarawy should be given a mention, especially for what he's done so far this current season?
Mina, how much you know me. The thing is that, in some way, if I consider just this part of the season, I can't really be surprised by Pirlo. He always have this high average, but anyway, he belongs to the group. El Shaarawy, I always thought it would be good, but so soon and so good. Guys, he got 14 goals. He's the top scorer by distance, better than the Cavani's, than the Di Natale. And most of all, it's true that he got more space and more minutes now that there is not Ibrahimovic there. But we always used to say that if the team is playing better, so the players in the team can perform even better. He basically saved the Milan house when everything was sinking. And he did with the unconsciousness of someone who's just 19 and is just giving everything. And he has been a player all over the pitch, not only scoring, but the kind of Rooney, helping in defense, helping the building up. The way that El Shaarawy is increased, I think, maybe surprising even El Shaarawy himself.
I think we should also put a word in for Cassano. I mean, I was never the biggest Cassano fan, but to go from where he has been in terms of his health issues, to make that move and to just continually turn up at the big games, both for Italy and for Inter now, I think is very, very impressive. And the guy is a bit like a Pirlo type, a big game player. He's never that consistent, that is within his nature, but I think what he still can do outweighs all the negatives, so I think we should mention him.
No, I would definitely agree with that. But I wanted to see if there was a team that you thought that perhaps wouldn't do so well, and they've been surprising you, anything. Would there, as a particular name, stand out for you of a team that has perhaps overachieved?
Talking to me?
Well, if you would like, what do you think? I mean, I'm always going to choose Bologna because I'm a huge fan of Stefano Pioli, and I think what they're doing to Napoli is...
Well, to me, honestly, we can't escape from Fiorentina. Fiorentina, they don't have not even the squad to compete with the others. I mean, at the top of the table. They might have the starting 11, but still, they don't have any serious striker. Luca Toni now is back, but he was basically for 2 seasons, he was out of professional football, almost. They have almost all rookies in the defense. So just the midfield is the one that is at that level. Fiorentina still in this moment is not only the surprise for me, even considering that Inter is stumbling every couple of games, Napoli as well, Roma not trustable, Milan don't tell me. Still Fiorentina, the most serious contender, also looking at the way how they play. If Fiorentina would be in Champions League, they would perform even in Champions League. The limit of Montella, we still don't know, and this is very sexy.
I think this is what it is. You know, you were saying about Fiorentina this year, but maybe it was Catania last year, sort of last season. It's everything to do with what Montella is doing with his teams.
Yeah. Did you meet him? Because I met him, and he looked like I know that I have the power in myself, and you still don't know where I'm going to get. And this is what is really sexy. The other, they have the fear to be okay, how far we are behind Juventus, we will run for the second spot. But Fiorentina has nothing to lose, and so far wasn't outplayed by anybody. So it is every Sunday, every fixture is probably the most interesting thing to watch in Serie A.
Right, okay. Thank you so much for coming on to our show, Tancredi, and we wish you a Merry Christmas. Just wanted to ask you guys, do you think, what do you foresee happening this Serie A?
What I foresee happening is Juventus winning it. That's not much of a surprise. But when it comes to surprises in a negative sense, I think for me, maybe I'm just not realistic enough because I look at the team and don't look at the economic issues so much. But the failure really of Udinese to qualify twice in a row for the Champions League at the final hurdle, I think, is a big problem, both for them and also for Italian football. And I think that's, for me, as far as biggest disappointments is concerned, was the biggest disappointment. Because
this season was a bad one as well, wasn't it? Because it was against Braga.
It was just terrible.
And
Arsenal you can lose to,
yeah.
Braga.
Well, Guidolin looked a broken man at the end of that as well.
Penalties.
Yeah, but you shouldn't get to that point.
Absolutely, if they've got the ambition to do better. And when we're talking about ambition, we can take up Tancredi's point about Fiorentina, talking about wanting to watch them every week.
Last season.
They're on French television every single week. They absolutely love them. And they are great to watch. But really, it's all about their Mercato. Like you said, they were terrible last season. And I think the fact that they've moved on Corvino was a huge step for them as well. Because, you know, we talked about Monchi before at Sevilla. Corvino was absolutely legendary director of football, both at Lecce and then again at Fiorentina. So for them to say, look, it's not working anymore, we're going to move it on and you know, change it upstairs as well as changing Montella. Bring all those new players in, and the way they want to play is, you know, it's not even just about Jovetic anymore. When you saw them at Torino a couple of weeks back in what was a really entertaining game, you know, they were missing him. They were missing a couple of other players. They had 2 players go off in the first half hour. I think they've got a bit more of a squad than Tancredi gives them credit for.
Well, also, you know, they've got Borja Valero and all Aquilani, a great midfield. But I do want to move on to just, you know, the best players of the year. I'm only allowed now to ask for 3 players because we've talked so much. But I think we'll all agree on who those 3 are.
That's the point.
Exactly. So the third one is probably going to be Falcao.
Not for me. He's not in my top 3.
Okay, who's in your top 3?
Well, the bottom 3 really of the top 5. I've got Iniesta, I've got Drogba, and who's my 5th one?
I don't know.
Marco Reus.
I chose Reus too.
Yeah, very quickly, Iniesta still completely underrated in terms of what he does. And the global recognition that he gets for it, you know, win with Spain again. If it was any other year, if it wasn't Spain, you know, people would be raving about it, but they've done it so many times, so it's just another year. Drogba, Champions League, Roy's best player in Germany. And
you, top player outright? Can't ask you for the top 5 like him.
Well, I guess it's got to be Ronaldo for me. I just think an incredible year.
How wonderful of you, shaking it up.
But my other 3, I would have had Falcao, I would have had Ibrahimovic for doing it across 2 leagues and becoming a real leader at PSG, and one under the radar, João Moutinho, who had a great Euro 2012 and has been brilliant despite his move from Tottenham falling through. He's become even better in the second half of the year.
Well, no one's mentioned Pirlo, and I'll be a little bit upset about that, but I would have also gone for all of those, plus Royce and Pirlo. Thank you so much for joining us and for being with us in this 2012. We wish you a new year from all of us, Mina Rzouki, Andy Brassell, and Raphael Honigstein. See you in the new year.